So hello, everybody. It's good to see you all. Thank you for being here this evening. As you know, I think I'm going to talk about our female ancestral line. Now, this was something that was developed very recently by women, mostly in America, I believe. I may not have that completely right, and that's not completely true, but it's something that came in part from Grace Shireson at the San Francisco Zen Center. And in 2010, which is quite recent, the Soto Zen Buddhist Association, which is an organization of Soto Zen teachers in North America, approved a document honoring women ancestors in the Zen tradition. And they called it the Women Ancestors Document. It was the final product of years and years of research because we don't know about most of these women, and they had to go find them. And actually, before that, in 2007, the Salt Spring Zen Circle, Salt Spring Island is off Vancouver Island up in BC, so there's a Canadian influence here, and you'll see more of them in a little bit. But they came up with a visual document for the female ancestral line. And as I said, we'll see that in a few minutes. So that was in 2007. And then in 2010, the Soto Zen Buddhist Association approved a kind of official document. But I have to tell you, searching online, everything's different. I mean, I found several different documents, several different lists, that sort of thing. But the document basically includes women beginning with the time of the Buddha and up through our own time. And these documents actually usually include Reverend Master Jiyu, the founder of our order, which is kind of nice. Now, at some point in the process of trying to construct a female lineage, and as we know, the lineage, the ancestral lineage that we chant every day is almost all male. But in constructing the women ancestors document, the people involved wrote that they understood that it would require the support of influential male Zen teachers. And for that reason, they accommodated the more traditional among us and called our list Women Ancestors Document rather than Women's Lineage. And this distinguished the new document from long-established Soto Zen lineage, the long-established Soto Zen lineage chart, making it optional while allowing us to use it in the same ways. That's what they wrote about it. So, and I mention this only because I have to say that this is very politic, but it rankles a little bit with me as a little too compromising. I think that we didn't have to have the support of influential male Zen teachers, though that certainly helps. And I don't know that it needs to bear a different name, but these are my private opinions and aren't written in stone. But, Reverend Master Jiyu used to say repeatedly that if women wanted the same rights as men and wanted equality with men, then they needed to act as if they already had it. And so I kind of have that bias, if you will, towards this situation. Be that as it may, I am going to share my screen and show you the document, which has disappeared. How can that be? Just a second. I think we can get it back. Here we go. Okay. Can you see that red circle? Okay, so this is the document that the Salt Spring Zen Circle came up with. And you'll notice that it's an enso, this famous circle that Zen calligraphers like to make, broken circle, actually, showing brush marks. In the center, they've put Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom, and Kannon or Kanzeon, the Bodhisattva of compassion. So they've put these two mythological, if you will, figures in the middle. And then down here is, well, there's Prajnaparamita right there. And the circle goes this way. And it goes through Mahamaya, the Buddha's mother. I should say that none of this is it's not in chronological order. There's some rough chronology. The Indian ancestors tend to be here, and then the Chinese, and then the Japanese over here. And when we get down here to the modern era, we've got Ruth Fuller Sasaki, Maureen Stewart, and I don't know if you've heard of these people, but they're 20th century Zen, female Zen teachers, Aya Kema, and then Ho-Un-Jiu Kennett. She's the last one. I love this document because, well, I love the red, which of course is representative of the bloodline of the Buddhas. And in your male document papers, those of you who've received the precepts, there's a red line that runs through all the names of the ancestors representing the blood of the Buddhas. So here that's represented by the red enso. And the other thing I love about it, of course, is that it's in a circle. I just think that's so cool. And it's so female, if I may. And you'll have to forgive me because I'm probably going to generalize a lot tonight, so none of what I say will be true. But I see the circle as an attempt to break down the hierarchical, patriarchal way that our lineage is handed down to us and turn it into all of us living and working together with equality and helping and supporting each other. And I think that's quite beautiful. Now, if I can, well, I'm not going to share I was going to share it on a screen, but I don't really need to. I'll just tell you that you can find lists of these names written out, in order one after the other so that you can read them more readily, because reading a circle is a little awkward. But such a list exists. And I was going to show you one, but you know what I mean. And I wanted to mention that in some Soto Zen temples, this female lineage is given to people when they receive the precepts, both men and women, when they receive the precepts, along with the male ancestral line. And I just think that's marvelous. Progress. That said, I want to say something about identity politics, including gender. And I've said this to you before, but it's been a number of years. The thing about identity politics, where we get involved in whether we're male or female or binary or something else, or gay or straight or trans or, able or not able or, white or black or person of color, all that stuff that, it's actually become quite popular in Buddhist circles to claim our identities along those lines. On the one, well, I want to say that there's a danger in that because that can be a lot of self-creation, a lot of selfing, a lot of setting up a who I am and solidifying that image of who we think we are. So we can use all of this stuff to create and reinforce a self, and that isn't very helpful from this perspective. So from this point of view, I would say that gender is quite irrelevant in Buddhism. Our practices don't depend on gender. The teachings don't depend on gender. There's a way in which we can just leave it to the side and carry on. And, also because of the teachings on emptiness, gender's irrelevant. It's just another one of those identity markers that is empty of permanent self-existence, right? And also, I think that if we went back to the three natures of Yogacara, the dependent nature and the complete realized nature would not emphasize gender. And neither do our scriptures or ceremonies, as I said, the teachings. But on the other hand, there's a way in which gender is very important and it matters. And this is, I'm kind of talking here from the point of view of the two truths and the absolute and the relative. So on the one hand, gender is irrelevant. And on the other hand, it's very much a part of our lives and who we are and what we're up to. And for that reason, it needs to be paid attention to. And the problem with having a lineage chart that's completely or almost all male, and the problem with the history of Buddhism and Zen is that women have been erased. And it's the erasure of half the population that distresses me, that I think, something needs to be done about. And a lot of women in the West have been trying to unearth these women who we don't even know exist. We don't know their names. Sometimes we know there was a woman involved, but she was a tea lady. We don't know what her name is, that kind of thing. And there's actually a sense in which in the West, anybody who's not a white heterosexual male is erased. Now, I don't want to speak. I'm completely and utterly happy and fond of white heterosexual males. That's not the problem, right? We are all who we are. But the thing is that we all need to be able to exist visibly, no matter what we are or who we are. And to me, it's unjust and abusive when we erase whole factions of the population, not to mention women who are 51% of the population. And this had an incredibly intense effect, actually, on women Buddhist practitioners over the centuries, because they weren't taken seriously. They weren't seen as equal to men. It was often taught that women, you could not achieve enlightenment in a female body. So women were not supported as practitioners. They weren't trained as practitioners. They often just acted as servants or slaves to the male monks, and lived on very little because they were given so little. And all of this is deeply embedded culturally. And it's really, again, it's got nothing to do with the essence of Buddhism. It's a cultural phenomenon that arose in India and then in the rest of, this is how it was in India and Asia back then. And even when you look back in this country, it was 100 years ago that the women got the vote. And women couldn't own property. Women were the property of men, all that stuff. The litany. I will cease and desist. So women in Buddhism have been erased. Many of them don't have names. They weren't offered donations, as I said. They lived in service to monks and in subordination to monks. They were always junior to the monks. To me, the image of a male monk being ordained today, Reverend Master Mayon, the abbot of Shasta Abbey, who was ordained in 1979, would have to bow to him, and he would be senior to and superior to her. It's an interesting, to put it that concretely, is an interesting image to me. So women in the 20th, 21st century have begun trying to redress this erasure. And it's a phenomenal amount of work. I think partly just because you've got to know the languages. The information that has been historically preserved is not in English. And so it's a big project, and a lot of people have been working on it. And I think two books that have really turned a page in all of this is Grace Shierson's book. And I mentioned her earlier as one of the persons who's kind of leading this movement, if I can call it that. Grace Shierson wrote a book called Zen Women, Beyond Tea Ladies, Iron Maidens, and Macho Masters. So I mean, she's beyond the usual stereotypes. And then another woman, Zenshin Florence Kaplow, wrote a book called The Hidden Lamp, Stories from 25 Centuries of Awakened Women. She's got 100 stories in that book of 100 different women. So both of those have really made a huge difference in what we know about women throughout history practicing in our tradition. And I might also I have a whole stack of books here. I won't show them all to you, but this book by Paula Arai, Women Living Zen. Paula Arai is a scholar practitioner and speaks Japanese and that sort of thing. And this book is about the development of women in Zen, and mostly in the 20th century. It's seminal and it's very good. And it's dense reading, so approach with caution. And then this book by Beata Grant is highly respected. It's called Daughters of Emptiness, Poems of Chinese Buddhist Nuns. So just to give you a little sample of some of the things that are out there, in case you want to look into them. So I want to tell you a couple stories. One, I'll begin with Maha Prajapati. Maha Prajapati was the Buddha's aunt, the sister of the Buddha's mother, Maya, who died 7 days after he was born. And Maha Prajapati raised the Buddha. I understand that she nursed him. She had a baby at about the same time, Ananda's cousin, who we hear of later, because he was an attendant to the Buddha. So Maha Prajapati, after the Buddha became the Buddha, and there was a male Sangha established, a male monastic Sangha established, and the Buddha had been teaching for some time, Maha Prajapati decided she wanted to become a monk. And she asked the Buddha 3 times, and each time he said no. So Maha Prajapati and 500, which is a number often used in these scriptures to mean a lot, 500 women put on robes, shaved their heads, and walked barefoot 250 miles to where the Buddha was staying to pursue this possibility of becoming monks. And the Buddha kept refusing, and finally Ananda interfered on their behalf. And he asked the Buddha, can't women attain enlightenment just as well as men? Can't they practice just as deeply as men? And the Buddha said, yes, of course they can. And then so Ananda said, so why can't they become monks? So the Buddha relented. And, I'm giving you the short version of this. So the Buddha relented and ordained these women. And so we owe it to Maha Prajapati and also to Ananda for the fact that the Buddha actually established a women's Sangha. And in Japan, they have a ceremony, the women have a ceremony they've devised thanking Ananda for doing this. And in one version of the ceremony, they refer to Ananda as a she, which is interesting because he was a he. Then I also just want to mention briefly that in our male ancestral lineage, we have Prajnatara, who is called Hanyatara in our ancestral line, who we talked about whenever a while back. Last time we met, I think. Anyway, we read something about Prajnatara, and anyway, I hope you remember her, Reverend Master Koten, again of our own order, now the head of our order, did the research that uncovered her to be female. Also, Fudamita is thought to be female, and so is Kanchi Sosan. And Kanchi Sosan was the author of That Which is Engraved Upon the Heart Which Trusts to the Eternal, which we read for our last gathering. So just, they're in there. And the gender gets lost over the centuries. Now, I want to mention a couple more. There was a nun named Rengetsu. She actually practiced for a long time as a layperson. She was the illegitimate child of a geisha and a samurai and was adopted by a temple priest. But she couldn't inherit his temple because she was female. And, this is one of the ways in which women get erased. But she was a very fine practitioner of calligraphy and especially pottery and some of the other arts. And they say that she produced 50,000 works of art. Now, this happened after the monk who adopted her died. And so she had been living in a small hermitage on his property, and she was booted out. So she had no way to make a living. And because, nobody supported monks. She also was trying to enter monastic training and was refused because of her beauty. And so she took a hibachi grill and scarred her face so that she wouldn't be beautiful, so that she could enter the monastic order. And this is the kind of lengths that some people went to. Of course, men went to lengths too. Ecco's supposed to have chopped off his arm. So there you are. Anyway, she wrote some beautiful poetry, and I thought I would just read you one of her short poems. It says, "Clad in black robes, I should have no attractions to the shapes and scents of this world. But how can I keep my vows, gazing at today's crimson maple leaves?" And I have to say, I identify with that poem. Clad in black robes, I should have no attractions to the shapes and scents of this world. But how can I keep my vows, gazing at today's crimson maple leaves? Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit, and I'm sorry I'm talking too long, and I'm going to keep talking. I'll tell you a little bit about Miao Zong. Miao Zong actually trained with various Zen masters. Her understanding of Buddha nature was clearly evident, and she was known for attempting to transcend biases, and differentiations between men and women. At some point, she met Dawi, who is one of the great Chinese masters, Chinese Chan masters, so one of the Chinese forerunners of Zen. She became his disciple, and she was given the name non-attachment. And at some point, the head monk at the monastery asked to see her. So when he went in to see her for spiritual counseling, he walked into the room and she was in there naked. And in a sense, she was saying to him, okay, if you're not attached, then don't be attached now, And during the conversation, she referred to her vagina as the place from which all Buddhas, patriarchs, and great monks originate. And so she's trying to, break down. He's got this terrible prejudice against women and doesn't think there should be women in the monastery, and women are the downfall of monks and they should go away and that sort of thing. And she's pointing to part of the greatness of women, which is that they're the place from which all Buddhas, patriarchs, and great monks originate. And I think of Prajnaparamita, who is called the mother of the Buddhas. Before we had any Buddhas, we had Prajnaparamita to give birth to them. It's something to think about. And anyway, she became very highly respected, and Dawi, her master, regularly sent students to her, and that's a kind of respect that was rarely shown to women. So he transmitted, he gave her Dharma transmission, and she eventually became the abbess of a monastery. Now, I'll just quickly mention lastly, Aoyama Roshi, who is actually still alive. She's a Japanese monk, female monk, who was the first female monk to be appointed to the rank of Dai Kyoshi, which means great teacher, in the Soto Zen tradition. And she was also one of the first monks to receive a Master's of Arts degree from Komazawa University, which is the Buddhist university in Japan. In 1976, she became abbess of Aichi Senman Nisoto, which is a female Zen training monastery in Japan, and was recognized as a Zen master and allowed to train novices. Of course, we shouldn't have to allow her to train novices because she's a Zen master. So anyway, but she was really seminal in breaking through a great deal of gender prejudice in Japan and doing something she was pivotal in transforming attitudes towards women in contemporary Japanese society, aside from trying to, working for gender parity within the Zen monastic Sangha. Okay, now I wanted to say a few words, if I may, about the importance of women practicing as women. And this is where, again, I start to make wild generalizations. But women practicing as women rather than as imitations of Zen masters. And I think that this is something women really have to contribute to the world of Zen. Kind of a shifting from a fierce samurai, really strict, kind of uptight practice that we might have based on Japanese Zen to something a little softer, practicing amidst daily life, amidst family, while working, and of course, men do these things too. A practice that emphasized compassion and kindness and caring, and supporting each other and helping each other, not trying to outcompete each other. So I think that that's one of the things that women had to offer as practitioners of Zen and of Buddhism. That's really important. Also, women tend to be more willing to include the emotions in our Zen practice and recognize emotions as an important aspect of our lives that are not something we discard as we practice, but actually move into more deeply and come to know more clearly and helpfully. And so there's that offering that they made too, that I think can be of value. And less competition, less kind of seizing the grail, if you will, and more practicing together in equality with each other, working together with compassion and with love, I think were important. And also, as women become more better trained in the 20th and 21st century and become teachers, become masters, are more prominent in the Zen and the Buddhist world, there's an attempt on a movement towards the breaking down of patriarchy, and an attempt to practice in a way that's more egalitarian that I think is very important. So I'll just end by saying that I don't think anyone's served when anyone is left out, female, male, anything else. I've said so many times that Buddhism is so much about inclusivity. And this is, I think, a really defining characteristic of what Buddhism is. And this is part of the teaching of the second nature, dependent nature. If we thinking of the Yogacara, three natures, it's part of the teaching of Indra's net. We're interdependent. We're all connected to each other. So I think it's helpful if we ask ourselves repeatedly, what are we not including? Where is our barrier that we can't go past? And is there a way that we could come to include that, whatever it is that we can't yet include? Because I think really this is the basis of our practice, the fundamental thing. So taking the steps that are being taken in the West to include women as equal to men is a good first step. And I think there's a lot more to do. And that's all I have to say tonight. And I hope you all have some thoughts. And thank you for listening.